Center for the Study of World Religions, Harvard Divinity School.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your patience. We wanted to wait a little, give it a little extra time because we felt like the snow and the parking delayed a lot of people's arrival. So welcome. My name is Charles Stang. I have the pleasure of serving as the director of the Center for the Study of World Religions here at Harvard Divinity School. For those of you who are new to this space, you are in Schwartz Hall of Harvard Divinity School. The CSWR is across the street at 42 Francis Avenue. For the past 8 years, the CSWR has been supporting poetry here at the Divinity School and the university more broadly. We've hosted countless readings, lectures, and workshops. And we're very proud of that support, and we're proud of the fruits of that work. Some of the fruits of our efforts you can find published in the annual journal entitled Peripheries, which is so beautifully designed and so capably edited by Shara Blore. You'll have another occasion to applaud Shara in a moment. But just, I want to say that over these past 8 years, it's been a great privilege to work with you, Shara, and to see this program flourish and to see Peripheries become what I'm told is a now flagship journal in poetry. That's largely due to your editorial efforts and the great talents of the poets published therein. Just last year, the CSWR started a poet in residence program, and we're very proud of it as well. Last year, perhaps some of you heard Alice Oswald read in this very room, and some of you perhaps heard Alice's play or performance of a lost play of Aeschylus, which we hosted in the Divinity Chapel in Divinity Hall. So it is a great honor and privilege to host Jane Hirshfield as our second poet in residence. Jane, I think it's fair to say that your residence has been too short. That's how we feel, at least. I don't know if you do, but we feel that it's been too short. But in these short few weeks that you've been with us, you've made an enormous impression, and I only wish you could stay for longer. So without further ado, you will hear Jane introduced properly, and you'll hear more from Shara, who will tell us about Peripheries. But thank you again so much for coming, and please join me in welcoming Shara Blore.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm not going to talk for a long time about Peripheries. I just want to welcome you here and say that, well, since I started working for this, for Peripheries, we've been talking, it must have been 2017, we've been talking about inviting Jane Hirshfield as the poet who would be perfectly suited to read here. So it really, and it took us a long time to get a hold of her and find her email address. So this has been a lot of sleuthing and many years that has brought us to this point. So I just want to thank you for all coming. And also just to say to look at CSWR website, also Peripheries website for other events that are going to be happening this semester, and for the launch of our annual magazine, which will occur in September. And I usually introduce the poets, but I really wanted Hyatt to introduce Jane. Hyatt is a student at HDS and feels like the new generation of poets that are taking over now, and has some poems in the new edition of Peripheries. So welcome, Hyatt.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Stang, too. And for everybody for coming. Now, when I come to readings, and especially for poets who I admire as much as Jane, the last thing I really want is for a third speaker to keep going on and on. So I'll try to be brief. Now, that said, Jane's life and work are a continuance of so many different sources that it's hard to be brief. Her books, 10 collections of poetry, 2 collections of essays, 2 collections of translations, and the anthology Women in Praise of the Sacred, 43 Centuries of Spiritual Poetry by Women. Each of these books stir at the intersections of spirituality, ethics, ecology, mysticism, the empirical sciences, the world's poetic traditions, and more and more. And the long litany of her accolades don't really make it easy to be brief either. So, well, I got to run through some. Her 2015 poetry collection, The Beauty, was longlisted for the National Book Award. Her 2011 collection, Come Thief, was a finalist for the PEN USA Poetry Award. And after, her 6th collection was shortlisted for the UK's T.S. Eliot Prize. And Given Sugar, Given Salt from 2001 was a finalist for the National Books Critics Award. Just a sampling, of her other awards include the Donald Hall Jane Kenyon Poetry Prize in American Literature, the Bay Area Book Reviewers Award, Columbia University's Translation Center Award, the Commonwealth Club of California Poetry Medal, and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Guggenheim Foundation. In 2012, she was elected as a chancellor for the Academy of American Poets. And in 2017, together with the Wick Poetry Center at Kent State University, she founded Poets for Science, which is an online and traveling installation that connects poetry and the sciences. In 2009, I promise I'm getting close. In 2019, she was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And in 2024, she became the first woman poet to receive the Zhongkung International Poetry Award, which is China's preeminent non-governmental award for a world poet from Peking University's Poetry Research Institute. So, awards aside, Jane's poems are, to me, and they have been, like lodestones. And lodestones are small, spare, humble little pieces of earth that have magnetism. And her poems, to me, often speak with this hushed, direct, sort of carefully spare voice. And the compassionate clarity of their images always seem to invite us closer and let us experience the poem's own little epiphanies for ourselves. And just listen to this poem of Gravity and Angels for a sense of what I'm trying to say. It's called A Story. A woman tells me the story of a small wild bird, beautiful on her windowsill, dead 3 days. How her daughter came suddenly running. It's moving, Mommy, he's alive. And when she went, it was. The emerald wing feathers stirred. The throat seemed to beat again with pulse. Closer then, she saw how the true life lifted under the wings, turned her face, so her daughter would not see, though she would see. Line by line, this poem asks us to come in. We follow the mother after her running daughter. We come behind and we bend down to peer with her at the bird. And then we're leaning even closer, sort of almost over her shoulder. And we are brought with her into the presence of inseparable polarities, life and death, beauty and rot. And we ourselves can feel that mother's need to shield a child, even if that effort is doomed to fail. And then, as with the rest of Jane's poems, we step out of a story, back into our own days, with our vision renewed and our feelings enlivened. And reading her prose is a similar experience for me. I first read both collections, 9 Gates, Entering the Mind of Poetry, and 10 Windows, How Great Poems Transform the World, a couple of years ago, well, more than a couple of years ago, not long after I had resolved myself to let my own life revolve around poetry and around poems. And reading those essays, which range from topics on originality, indirection, hiddenness, and surprise and paradox and transformation, reading those poems, I was taught by a much wiser and more insightful and knowledgeable lover of the art. But more importantly, I felt myself spoken for as a poet and as a person. It was a very powerful and lasting affirmation. And I still go back to those essays, even if my margin notes are so crowded that they look baroque. And this is all to say that having Jane's writing with you is like having a little magnet on a string that you can lower whenever you want into the well of your own life. And when you pull it back up, you could be surprised by all those little revelations that constellate around it, little things that you'd forgot you'd even lost. Things like a bent nail or a $50 or a necklace chain or an old ring. And these are little clues that you can put in your pocket and remind yourself as you go along, trying in your own ways just to get clear about what it means to be a human being together here with everybody else. But that's enough out of me. Please join me in welcoming Jane Hirshfield.
Well, good. You've all had a chance to forget the expectations that have just been raised. Although I must say, I have rarely basked so happily in a phrase as being the little magnet. I really like being the little magnet. Thank you. And I have loved being here, and it has flown by and been far too fast. And every single person I have met, even the person who guided me to the front door of the Museum of Natural History yesterday, I could have sat down with and talked to for 3 hours. She works in regenerative tissue, cutting edge biology. But she first said, "Oh, I work on broken hearts." It has been just extraordinary, and I'm very grateful for your hospitality bringing me into this community. So I'm going to read a range of things. I could have chosen to do a reading that was tilted towards the Divinity School being our venue, and I've decided to do something a little more broad, and it's going to jump all over in time. The opening poem is the earliest of my poems that I have a continuing relationship with. It was written quite a long time ago. And one of the interesting things about time and poems is they change meaning. You write a poem out of one very particular circumstance of life. This poem was written, I was absolutely shattered by the end of my first great love. And that was how I came to write it. 6 months later, after it was published in a magazine, somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, I love your poem. I had it read at my wedding." And I concealed my shock and said, "Thank you." And the poem ended up in a lot of wedding anthologies. And then in 2008, I was traveling with a small group of American writers through Syria, Jordan. We went to a university in Ramallah. We went to East Jerusalem. We went to Turkey. And we met, because this was under the auspices of Iowa International Writing Program, we met with very interesting people everywhere we went, and they decided to make a broadside of this poem and hand it out to people like, the Grand Mufti of Syria and the Jordanian Minister of Education, all of whom I'm sure were entirely baffled by being given this poem. But, all of a sudden it's a poem of diplomacy. And then more recently, in this last couple of years, it has become a poem for me that speaks into our current situation. So long preface, not that long a poem. For what binds us. There are names for what binds us. Strong forces, weak forces. Look around, you can see them. The skin that forms in a half-empty cup, nails rusting into the places they join, joints dovetailed on their own weight. the way things stay so solidly wherever they've been set down. And gravity, scientists say, is weak. And see how the flesh grows back across a wound with a great vehemence, more strong than the simple, untested surface before. There's a name for it on horses when it comes back darker and raised. Proud flesh. As all flesh is proud of its wounds, wears them as honors given out after battle, small triumphs pinned to the chest. And when two people have loved each other, see how it is like a scar between their bodies, stronger, darker, and proud. How the black cord makes of them a single fabric that nothing can mend or tear. So we are all in this together. Now I am going to come vertiginously forward in time to two of the most recent poems that have been written and come out, both of which speak into this current moment. One of them, if I didn't say the next thing I'm about to say, one of them is written, it could slip past a censor. You might think it's a poem only about cows, but it's not. And you will recognize what it is about because I have tipped you off. And I hope even if I hadn't, it is recognizable. And the second one, both are very pastoral in their openings. The second one gets quite explicit at the end. So, cows lying down. A Holstein cow lying down. It would seem impossible for such an awkward shape to return to standing. Yet, lifting part by part the unlabeled and milky charts of their being, they do. With two thumbtacks, one black, one white, I entrust this vision of unsupine cows to the future. Okay, you get it. Thank you. And the second one is called Field. A horse's field of vision with both large eyes open covers 350 degrees. Only a little is missing. A few inches directly in front of the face, a sliver behind the tail. Sometimes an era, a country, turns into a horse, a plunging forward, its own stinging bee that it flees, denying future and past, trampling its people as if they were pliable grasses. So I have been thinking a lot, as you heard in the introduction, about science and poetry and the expansion of perception, which also would cover, I think, the work of this building. How can we take our understanding, our attempts to comprehend what we don't yet know or understand, and see more largely, more accurately, more capably with all of our capacities, which do include the capacities of emotion and not only mind. They are so interdependent, as neuroscience has been confirming for quite a while now. They can't be separated. But as I have thought and worked with many research scientists, bringing poetry and that together, what I have come to say is, there is a point where they are not doing the same thing. And we do science in the effort to answer questions that we believe have answers, at least answers that last for a century or two, until they then get revised. We write poems because there are questions that absolutely can never be answered, and yet they require of us some response. They require of us a meeting. And nobody has described this better than Robert Frost, calling it a momentary stay against confusion. And they are momentary. You know, you read one elegy and 3 months later, you really need another one because there is no definitive answer to the grief of loss and the mystery of death. So I thought I would read you next a poem, the only poem I'll read today that I co-translated and did not write, because it is an example for me of a poem that once I understood it, it did change my life. It changed my relationship to the difficult. And working as I did on these poems, the book is The Ink Dark Moon, and it contains work by the two great women poets of Japan's classical era. One wrote 1,200 years ago, the other 1,000 years ago. And the one from 1,000 years ago, Izumi Shikibu, you can think of as the equivalent of Emily Dickinson with her place in Japanese literature. There are 1,000 poems, and she is absolutely a pinnacle poet to this day. Working with my Japanese co-translator, who was the language end of our becoming one translation together, she gave, you know, I understood the grammar, I had all the vocabulary, but I couldn't figure out what the poem said. Japanese is a very different language than English. And I just, you know, all I had was the intuition that it was a major poem. There was something in it. And it wasn't until, you know, a week of going, what is it? What is it? What is it? That I understood it, and then I could translate it. So I'm going to read it, say a little something, and then I'll read it again. Although the wind blows terribly here, the moonlight also leaks between the roof planks of this ruined house. The form is tanka. It's 2 lines longer than haiku. We know what a cold wind is. You know, we have all experienced, especially recently, the hardship of cold winds. And in our emotional life, we know what a cold wind is. We know that a house, you know, if you take a kind of Jungian archetype approach to images, a house, especially in spiritual poetry, almost always stands for the self. It is what we have our life inside of. The moon in Japanese poetry can have many meanings. It could be the fullness of a love affair at its height, but most commonly it is a way to speak of Buddhist enlightenment, Buddhist awakening. So what I suddenly understood was that the poem was saying, if you try to protect yourself from pain, you will wall out everything. You will not have a life. If your house is impermeable, you don't just keep out the cold winds, you keep out the moonlight. That completely altered, once I understood it, my own relationship to the difficult. And the traces of this poem run throughout my work. We did the work of this book when I was on my Guggenheim Fellowship in 1985. So it's been influencing me a long time. Although the wind blows terribly here, the moonlight also leaks between the roof planks of this ruined house. The second poem that changed my life in very outward ways, I wrote. So in 2014, I had been writing poems about what I like to call the crisis of the biosphere, because I think it includes climate, but it also includes toxins, extinctions, habitat loss. I had been writing poems about that for a long time, but for some reason in 2014, it became more urgent. It just stepped forward. And I wrote this poem, and it frightened me. And I held on to it for years before I published it, because I thought it had work to do. And then a moment came when I knew it could do its work, and it went out and did it. It was published in the context of politics. It has since come back to the context of the environment and has become, in a small way, an anthem amongst environmental activists. Its poem, rhetoric calls this kind of poem apopotraic. It is a spell against something happening. And what it hopes to be a spell against is what it says itself. It is a poem that hopes to erase itself from meaningfulness, that in 100 years, if someone stumbled over it, they would say, what was she so worried about? Let them not say. Let them not say, we did not see it. We saw. Let them not say, we did not hear it. We heard. Let them not say, they did not taste it. We ate. We trembled. Let them not say it was not spoken, not written. We spoke. We witnessed with voices and hands. Let them not say they did nothing. We did not enough. Let them say, as they must say something, a kerosene beauty. It burned. Let them say, we warmed ourselves by it, read by its light, praised, and it burned. You know, part of that poem is, I always want to admit, you know, I like to read at night. I heat my house. You know, I am as much a part of it as anyone. I lived years by kerosene lamp light, breathing in many toxins, no doubt, that I was unaware of. So I thought I'd give you next a much earlier poem, early enough that its title is the term that was turned away from, global warming. It's very short, and it's a bit of a found poem, just to give you a little process. You know, you come to poetry readings to hear the gossip. You can meet the poems on the page, but at the reading, you hear the gossip. So I read the story it holds in Robert Hughes's book about Australia. And as soon as I read it, I went, oh, that can speak to something. What does it want to speak to? And I spent a week trying to figure out what this story could speak to until I realized, global warming. When his ship first came to Australia, Cook wrote, the natives continued fishing without looking up, unable, it seemed, to fear what was too large to be comprehended. So it was only when the little boats set forward from the big boat that there was a reaction. And this poem has been used in some, you know, environmental lawsuit, went to a court of appeals. But for me, I wrote it. The problem for me, because poems for me are always a repair of some fracture, some question, some problem, some imbalance, something that needs the poem for its momentary stay. And I did not like myself being the person who was stamping her foot in the face of people who were climate deniers. It's not that I approve of climate denial, I just didn't like my petulance. And this poem let me understand them. Not all of them, some of them, I think it's quite deliberate, but that maybe some of them, it was just so enormous that they could not see it. And once I found that small bit of possible compassion, I liked myself better for trying to do it. Didn't change me from, you know, trying to, be part of the repair of this, but I would rather repair in sorrow than in anger. That's just me. That's how I am built. Okay, I'm going to skip the next poem because I always choose more. So you're not going to hear on the fifth day, which was written, I will just say, on the fifth day of the first go around of what we are currently in. That was the day that the White House took down all the climate change information from the website and told all of the scientists they could not speak to the public. Exactly the same on the fifth day this time. The exact same thing happened. But the poem's in the book if anybody wants to find it. What I will read is a more recent poem. Like many American poets, some of my poems come from the New York Times science pages. And the first summer of the pandemic, there was this gorgeous piece about mosses growing in the Mojave Desert, which is not where we expect mosses to be. And the piece was beautifully written. I borrowed some of its language, and it somehow became for me something that I knew someday I would write about. And then Dava Sobel sent me an invitation to give her a poem for Scientific American. And I knew it would be this poem, but I hadn't finished it because I couldn't find an ending. And it took about 6 months before I found the ending to it. So the poem is called Mosses, and here's a little bit from the Times article. In the Mojave Desert, a translucent crystal offers bryophytes much needed respite from the heat of the sun. For hypolithic mosses, it seems 4% of daylight is right. They live, the headline says, by sheltering under a parasol of translucent quartz. The crystal scatters the light's ultraviolet, dilutes its heat, traps the night's condensed moisture to moss-sized rain. I think of these mosses and consider, perhaps we too are mosses, evolving to the parch of our self-made Mojaves, unable to bear the full brightness, the full seeing, to recognize fully the Amazon burning, the Arctic burning, the monarch's smoke-colored missing migration. An experiment not meant to last. And yet, we found shelter within it. We pondered our lives and the lives of others, thirsted, slept. To the implausible green of existence, for better, for worse, we offered our 4% portion of praises. For better, for worse, our 4% portion of comprehension. You know, I've never read that poem right next to global warming before. And, you know, there's decades between them. And suddenly I went, oh, that's the same idea, isn't it? You know, that unable to bear the full brightness, the full seeing. So the poem was translated last year for selected poems that came out in the Czech language. And because I'm alive, my translators can send me questions, which some of them do, some of them don't. And his question was, what is this for better, for worse? And I realized, oh, that's not part of the Czech wedding vows, huh? And I told him and said, you know, good luck. I never ask them what they end up doing with something that doesn't translate. I just say, good luck. You have my permission. No wind, no rain. No wind, no rain. The tree just fell as a piece of fruit does. But no, not fruit. Not fruit, not ripe, not fell. It broke, it shattered. One cone's addition of resinous cell sap, one small-bodied bird arriving to tap for a beetle, it shattered. What word, what act was it we thought did not matter? Skipping the darkest poem I've ever written and moving towards, so I am covering various themes over the course of this. I will eventually get to a few poems which acknowledge the building we're in a little more directly, although I think all of them acknowledge interconnection, existence, the attempt to feel and see in ways informed by something beyond ego and purpose. Or I think I'll retract that because we do feel such a strong sense of purpose right now. So this poem continues to have in it, it draws on things from science. It's got the geomorphology of how Florida was made. It's got the International Space Station in its title. It has evolution, but then it also has the Syrian civil war and terrorism. And by its end, it has something that was going on for a very long time when I wrote this poem and continues to be in the news now, which is the fate of refugees in the Mediterranean. Day beginning with seeing the International Space Station and a full moon over the Gulf of Mexico and all its invisible fishes. None of this had to happen. Not Florida, not the ibis's beak, not water. Not the horseshoe crab's empty body and not the living starfish. Evolution might have turned left at the corner and gone down another street entirely. The asteroid might have missed. The seams of limestone need not have been susceptible to sand and mangroves. The radio might have found a different music. The hips of one man and the hips of another might have stood beside each other on a bus in Aleppo and recognized themselves as long-lost brothers. The key could have broken off in the lock and the nail can refused its lid. I might have been the fish the brown pelican swallowed. You might have been the way the moon kept not setting long after we thought it would, long after the sun was catching inside the low wave curls coming in at a certain angle. The light might not have been eaten again by its moving. If the unbearable were not weightless, we might yet buckle under the grief of what hasn't changed yet. Across the world, a man pulls a woman from the water from which the leapt from overfilled boat has entirely vanished. From the water pulls one child, another. Both are living, and both will continue to live. This did not have to happen. No part of this had to happen. I picked a really strange poem to read next. I cannot remember the last time I said this poem. It's very early, and I suddenly realized how parallel it is to what we are seeing right now. Everybody has forgotten this. This was such a small thing, such a brief thing, such a passing thing from the point of view of an American on the mainland reading the newspapers. But on October 25th, 1983, America invaded Grenada and took out the government and replaced it. And if you read the Wikipedia article on this, which I just did to refresh myself, it is described as having been done by Reagan in part to distract people from the hostages in Iran. I wrote the poem days before the invasion happened, when the newspaper was full of what, forgive me for using this word, one can only describe as the grooming of the American public for this invasion. Bernie Sanders led a 50,000 person protest against its happening. So, you know, the parallels are so close to so much. October 20th. Oh, and then it has a Greek tragedy. And, you know, it's like, it's me. I'm a little indirect, little pastoral. October 20th, 1983. On a quiet morning in autumn, I read the ledgers of a war, as one can any day. Any list biased, dishonest, incomplete, and still the numbers are kept. It is true, the papyrus wears thin after 40 centuries. For the winter garden, roses are pruned and carefully tied, earth banked up over the roots. What if, after Antigone, the moment of catharsis, we quarrel in the car going home? If compassion cannot cure us, what if we fail? I look at my hands, my fingernails still black with chosen labors. I know that tomorrow I will go out again to mulch, to bind, to clip, and that no order imposed is free of guilt. The line from a Greek chorus, sing sorrow, sorrow, but good win out in the end. But who is measuring? What heart would choose this tune? So, I have been haunted, as you heard in Let Them Not Say. I have continued much more so recently. It gets into more and more of my poems, which might be a problem for the next book. I have been haunted by thinking of the future and the world that we are leaving the young and the next generation and the next generation. So this poem reflects that. And I am reading it not least because the two other people who are part of its we are in the room with me. It was written when we had almost exactly a year ago, a conversation in the courtyard of the beautiful Julia Morgan building in Berkeley. I speak with the future. We sit on our skeleton's bones. We hear with our skeleton's bones. We speak of beauty by moving our jaws and our teeth. The original meaning of paradise, a place, a walled garden. Our lives are stories, this hour inside one, a staircase from Piranesi, a hummingbird drinking. Outside it, vanishing species and rivers. Outside it, Nanjing, Nineveh, Dresden. Outside it, Gaza, Sudan, Myanmar, Kiev, here. The world starts and ends, starts, ends, ends again, restarts. A kalpa is brief and wall-less. Unborn ones take nothing for granted, not nectar, not thirst. May your lives be uneclipsed, your failures be passing. May you have your portions of beauty, of grief, in a garden whose plants and birds I cannot imagine. I should have said what a kalpa is. Shorthand, very shorthand, a really, really long time. I live in the town of Mill Valley, 2 towns north of the Golden Gate Bridge. And I'm going to read you 2 poems that come from that. The first does have some connection to the large. And so Mill Valley got its name from the mill that took all the redwood trees off Mount Tamalpais and sent them to San Francisco to rebuild it after the 1906 earthquake and fire. Pictures of Mill Valley from the 20s, it's a very sunny town. Redwood trees come back, a ring around the roots of the tree that was cut. Mill Valley is now a very shady place, including this particular tree. It is foolish to let a young redwood grow next to a house. Even in this one lifetime, you will have to choose that great calm being, this clutter of soup pots and books. Already the first branch tips brush at the window. Softly, calmly, immensity taps at your life. So I will never take that tree out. Someday the tree and the house are going to get into a large argument, but by then the house will have been torn down because it's a little cottage and it's in Mill Valley. So this is, that's a pretty early poem. This one, again, more recent. The same mountain is in it, Mount Tam. Etel Adnan was, at the time that she lived in Sausalito near me, she was the most well-known Arabic language writer in America. And we knew that she drew, painted a little. By the end of her long life, when she was living in Paris, she was having one-woman shows as a painter in the great museums of the world. After she died, I was reading some of her things, including a letter, and this little snippet caught me and somehow announced that, oh, try starting from that, see where it goes. So what she wrote was, and if you like numbers, I will tell you that here on earth, I wake thinking about a woman with whom, oh, I forgot to say, I should have said, all her life she painted Mount Tam. The shape of Mount Tam was in her paintings throughout. Okay. I wake thinking about a woman with whom I once shared a mountain. If you, as she did, like numbers, I can tell you that here on earth this day, it is 55 degrees, a June 9th, uncommonly cold. I can tell you that for company now, this day, you have roughly 8 billion living kin. I can tell you that since sapiens beginning, 117 billion have breathed in, out, and in again then, at least once. That worldwide this day, 1 person in 7 is hungry. The 32 countries are listed as zones in conflict. That Beirut, where the woman was born, is called past the brink. If you like numbers, I can tell you a single great blue heron flew earlier today by a 10-windowed alcove. That in Canada, 10.6 million acres burned today still unchecked. Though this morning the smoke has moved elsewhere, its parts per millions returning their color to 2 big wings folded up in a tree. I can tell you, conceived yesterday something like 385,000 babies, and that tomorrow 158,000, all ages, will probably die. There is also this to consider about numbers, the way that the more a life's counted, the less that life seems to count. I can tell you that one person born in Beirut, dead in Paris, for a time shared with me a mountain in California she never forgot. I can tell you its colors inside her paintings still astonish. Mountain, 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 kept saying her brush. It is important to me, as much as my work has turned towards the crises of biosphere and social compact, that poetry not abandon interiority, individual life. They go on together. They have gone on together in the lives of every person who has lived in a difficult time or a good time. And so I wanted to give you some of those, but I also want to start cutting more things. I'm going to read you some very short poems because I haven't read you many of them, and I love very short poems. I call them pebbles. They are not haiku. They are very short, but there is an entire, I am very informed by the Eastern traditions and their very short poems, but the Western lineage also has many very short poems and many ways of writing short poems. So this one has to do with how when you choose to think about and name something differently, it changes everything about it. I sat in the sun. I moved my chair into sun. I sat in the sun, the way hunger is moved when called fasting. This one's really short. And, you know, as with so many, it is describing exactly what it is describing, and I hope you hear another dimension. It takes so little, the difference between cold rain and snow. So the words we use. When I was titling Women in Praise of the Sacred, I had a terrible time because I didn't like any of the words. I didn't want to say sacred. I didn't want to say spiritual. I didn't want to say religion. I didn't want to say any of all those things. And then some years later, the writer Barry Lopez and I were doing a panel at the Key West Literary Seminars, and the theme that year was spirituality. And we were given a title for our panel, and we both loved the idea of the conversation, and I completely objected to the title. And Barry and I had a 45-minute phone call talking about what to call this panel. And it was the most fascinating discussion because he was coming with basically a Christian, vocabulary, and I was coming with a Zen vocabulary where, you just, what is Buddha? The oak tree at the foot of the garden, 3 pounds of flax, roll of toilet paper. And we finally found a word we both liked. And it was only after we had decided on it that I looked it up for the etymology of it, and then I loved it even more. So the word we chose for the title of the panel was the numinous, the numinous. And when I looked up the etymology of numinous, it refers to the physical act of nodding, saying yes. So that word is in this poem. And the other word that's in this poem that is hardly in any of my poems, because I just told you it wasn't my vocabulary, but no other word would do. So I had to use it, as the word God is in this poem with a capital G. So anyhow, it's a weird poem, but I thought it would be fun to talk to you about numinous. So I wanted to be an accomplice. Imputable, guilty as charged, to have left ungloved a fingerprint on this world. Numinous, at its root, the act of nodding, God's inexhaustible alibi, Yes, I was here. So this next poem, after it gets going later on in it, has the same yes in it. The story behind this poem is I wrote this not too long ago. I was at the artist retreat Yaddo, and one of the other people there with me was a man named Ashon Crawley, who is a professor of religion at University of Virginia, working on the Black Pentecostal experience. And he told the story that this poem then goes on to about, he's also a choir leader. And this was a piece that he was doing during the pandemic when people were putting together people singing from, you know, their own homes and making one thing of it. I asked his permission if I could tell the story, and he said yes. But the poem starts with the famous quote from the Roman playwright Terence, homo sum humani nihila me alienum puto. I am human, nothing human is alien to me, or foreign from me, separate from me, distant from me. So that's what I started out thinking about, and then Ashon's story came into the poem and gave it its title. The title, The Most Difficult Music. I ask of the playwright, forgive my foreshortened compassion. Rome too surely abounded with unharnessed malice, stupidity, spite. I ask also my cat to forgive me for taking the mouse half alive back outside. I ask the mouse to forgive me for lengthening its suffering. Singers asked to record the single word yes for half an hour over and over, reported back one by one to the choir's director that they needed more time to prepare. The most difficult piece I've ever done, each said. Okay, let me just choose which else I will give you. Two ostensibly scientifically informed poems that are also, as all the poems, I have a little series of poems, many of them in one book together, and then they keep recurring since then, whose titles all begin with my, my this, my that. And what linked many of the early ones was, it sounds like if you're talking about my this, my that, you're talking about a self, but what they're actually doing is investigating, where does the self begin and end? What is self, what isn't self? And because I have spent 50 years in the practice of Zen now, this is a rich question. The interconnection and interdependence and permeability of identity. So the first one that I wrote is this first of two that I'll read you, My Skeleton. My skeleton, who once ached with your own growing larger, are now each year imperceptibly smaller, lighter, absorbed by your own concentration. When I danced, you danced. When you broke, I. And so it was, lying down, walking, climbing the tiring stairs. Your jaws, my bread. Someday you, what is left of you, will be flensed of this marriage. Angular wrist bones, arthritis, cracked harp of rib cage, blunt of heel, opened bowl of the skull, twin platters of pelvis. Each of you will leave me behind, at last serene. What did I know of your days, your nights? I who held you all my life inside my hands and thought they were empty. You who held me all your life in your hands, as a new mother holds her own unblanketed child, not thinking at all. And this next one, which came from a much earlier Science Times article, back when nobody knew about the microbiome, that's in here. And the other thing in here was an article, which as soon as I read it, I thought, oh, that's going to turn into something. They discovered the actual way that the protein of itch works. And this was thrilling to me. So the poem is called My Proteins, but it moves on to the microbiome and, you know, the 10 billion independent beings who live inside us and govern our mood, our intelligence, our health, our everything. My proteins. They have discovered, they say, the protein of itch, natriuretic polypeptide B, and that it travels its own distinct pathway inside my spine, as do pain, pleasure, and heat. A body, it seems, is a highway, a cloverleaf crossing, well built, well traversed. Some of me going north, some going south. 90% of my cells, they have discovered, are not my own person. They are other beings inside me. As 96% of my life is not my life. Yet I, they say, am they. My bacteria and yeasts, my father and mother, grandparents, lovers, my drivers talking on cell phones, my subways and bridges, my thieves, my police who chase myself night and day. My proteins, apparently also me, fold the shirts. I find in this crowded metropolis a quiet corner where I build of not me Lego blocks, a bench, pigeons, a sandwich of rye bread, mustard, and cheese. It is me and is not the hunger that makes the sandwich good. It is not me, then is the sandwich. A mystery neither of us can fold, unfold, or consume. As I so often do, I forgot to remind you that proteins take their name from Proteus, the shape-changing god, and they work by folding and unfolding, which is kind of important for the poem, but maybe you all knew that already. Okay, I will end now with one more poem, a poem both deeply personal and at the same time, and I was totally aware of the dual awareness when I wrote it, of the biosphere. So it speaks of resilience and of biological resilience. And one thing which is very important to me is remembering that the repair of the world is nothing human beings can do on our own. All of living existence participates. And one of the few pieces of good news we've all heard in the last months was that they say not fast enough, but I still hope it's good news. In every ocean of the world, bacteria have evolved who are able to consume and break down plastics. This is both horrifying and hopeful to me. But I wrote the poem when I myself was very much in need of resilience, optimism. More and more, I have come to admire resilience, not the simple resistance of a pillow whose foam returns over and over to the same shape, but the sinuous tenacity of a tree. Finding the light newly blocked on one side, it turns in another. A blind intelligence, true, but out of such persistence arose turtles, rivers, mitochondria, figs, all this resinous, unretractable earth. Thank you for your patience. Thank you. It was a long reading. Thank you so much. We'll take
CSWR.HDS.Harvard.edu. Copyright 2026. The President and Fellows of Harvard College.